Good morning and welcome to the Ironwood Strength Show, episode 4. Today is October 21st, Saturday. Today I'm going to go over a few things, try to get some clarification on some terminology out of the way, because these are the terms that I'm going to use frequently throughout many of the episodes. And if you don't have a general basic understanding of that, there's going to be some confusion. There's also some of these terms that have been used quite often that are used incorrectly or have been, like many things, altered over the years. Um, as time goes on, definitions kind of get skewed and altered, and it's not really anyone's fault. It's just what happens. Some of the things have been mischaracterized, um, but I'm going to try to get all that out of the way, and I'm going to go back to the original definitions as I understood them. Um, been thinking about it all week, and the more I think about it, the more complicated this stuff gets. So, um, I tried to dig in, do a little bit more research on it, and find out some more information. Going through a lot of my old notes, pulled out some of the books, and um, really, this probably needs to be a multiple part show. I'm not going to do that. Try to get some just the basics covered, and then as episodes go on, I will and these topics come up more, and I'll get more in detail and try to get a better understanding as time progresses. But today I want to go over some of that terminology and covering the different methods of strength training first. That'll be things like, or just that just classifies what type of work you're doing, such as max effort, dynamic effort. Um, and then moving on from that, I'm going to get into the classification of training exercises or the means of training that you're utilizing. And that's things such as GPP, SPP, and SSP, which I will define and clarify. And that's really where I see things getting messed up. And I've seen this over and over throughout my career. And obviously, I'm not in my career anymore, but um, throughout my career, I was seeing some of these things getting messed up. So I'm going to start off with the methods of strength training, and there are three that's typically talked about in the United States. Okay, but there's actually four, and these terms were all defined by Vladimir Zatsiorsky in his book Science and Practice of Strength Training, which is an excellent book from a very top sports scientist. That I think he came over from Russia. I could be wrong about that. But one of those Eastern Bloc countries, um, came over to the United States. Very, very knowledgeable guy. Um, and I believe, I don't know if he still is, but he was a professor at University of Pennsylvania, or Penn State. Sorry, not Penn. He was at Penn State. Um, so the first one, everyone knows max effort and dynamic effort, and I'll get to those last. The ones that get screwed up probably the most are the repetition effort, or repeated effort, as it was actually called originally, was the repeated effort, and the one that a lot of people don't talk about, which is the sub-max effort. The repeated effort is taking a non-max load and lifting it to fatigue or failure. And I'm not going to, he actually wrote in the book, I believe, that he's taking it to fatigue, which is different than taking it to failure, because you actually fatigue a few reps prior to failure. Um, the submax effort is taking a non maximal load, the same as a repeated effort, and training not to failure. Okay, so you're not going to take it as far as the repeated effort. The repeated effort, you're really going to kind of push into that set. It's going to get a lot harder. You're going to have a lot more fatigue, possibly failure at the last rep. The submax effort, you're going to cut it off early. And I think a lot of people think that utilize, I'm going to, West Side Barbell made these methods what they are in the United States. Louis Simmons, Dave Tate, when he was there and writing about those methods, they really popularized these methods to a great degree. and they always talked about the repeated effort method, but they never talked about the sub-max effort. Um, Consequently, what a lot of people have done, they've changed that. They say they're doing the repeated effort. And I remember Louis and Dave writing articles about this and talking about this, and they would specifically say on repeated effort, you're gonna take your set to failure, or maybe within 1 or 2 reps of failure. And this is predominantly done with your assistance work. Doesn't have to be assistance work. That's how it was utilized as Westside Barbell was talking about it. Um, but I think what a lot of people ended up doing is not really, they kind of cut that failure part out of it, and they would just do a set. And they would say, oh, just get your assistance work in. It's not that important, which actually it's very important. And you're going to cut it off. We're going to do 3 sets of 8. And instead of pushing all of those sets, or at least the last set, to close to failure or failure, they were just doing 3 sets of 8. Okay. And it ended up not being as difficult as it needed to be, so they weren't really getting the hypertrophy effect, supposedly, that they were looking for. And in other words, they were doing sub-max effort instead of repeated effort. And I think that's probably what happens with most people, is that they don't really push the limits in that set, and they end up doing sub-max effort. I know when I was coaching, a lot of time that's the way the assistance work was. It wasn't regulated as hard as our main movements. So they ended up doing a lot of sub-max effort, where they probably had 3-4 more reps in the tank, and they weren't really getting into those hard reps. Okay, but why, and Zatsiorsky even said you can get similar amounts of hypertrophy out of the repeated effort or the submaximal effort. So why do we need to classify these as 2 different things when people are probably doing one or the other on either on any given day with their assistance work? The reason being is this stuff really comes into play if you're really trying to outline and control intensity throughout different blocks of training, or throughout periods of training, or even if you don't do blocks or periods and you just kind of train. I'm not getting into periodization or programming right now, but if you train kind of at the same level all the time, there's still times when you want to back off. So you want to do submax instead of repeated effort, and you don't necessarily need to clarify this all the time. And some people might do it subconsciously, where they're feeling tired one week, so they're not going to push that assistance work quite as hard, or they get to closer to a competition, they're not pushing it quite as hard. For athletes, like at the college level, in season, they're probably not going to push their assistance work as hard as out of season. Okay. So that's kind of where, if you're really into programming and trying to understand where all this fits in, you can understand there's going to be times you don't want to push as close to failure, and you're going to be doing sub-max, where there's other times where you're wanting to push a lot harder, and that's actually the repeated effort method. Okay, and I'm saying assistance work a lot. It does not have to be assistance work. These classify how the work is done. So if you're doing probably more than 4 reps or more, it's going to fall into that repeated effort or submax effort. If you're doing a 4-rep max, but you only do it for 1 rep, that would classify as a submax effort. Where the repeated effort method, you're going to have do multiple reps because it is repeated. If you're doing an 8-rep max, all you can do for 8 reps, but you're shutting it down at 7, or you're pushing on that 8th rep and you couldn't have got another rep, that would be classified as repeated effort, even if it is a bigger exercise like bench or squat, or even your Olympic lifts, cleans, snatches. If you're cutting that set shorter, it's going to be classified as something else other than max effort or repeated effort. Okay, so let me move on. hopefully, basically the repeated effort and the submax effort, that's where you're doing your reps. That's where you're doing, generally speaking, you're doing 5, 6, 7, all the way 20 plus reps. Okay. And the only difference between the two is how far you take them in relation to your max, or in relation to failure for that exercise. Which repeated effort, you're going to push closer to failure. Submax effort, you're going to leave more reps in the tank. The repeated effort, especially, you're only going to leave at max 2 reps in the tank. So if you're doing a 10 rep max and you do 8 reps, I would still probably count that as repeated effort because you're close enough to that failure mark. Whereas a submax effort with a 10 rep max, you might only be doing 6 or 7 reps, shutting it down there. You're still getting work in, but it's not as fatiguing. And there are times you don't want the work to be fatiguing. So let me move on now. Hopefully that all made sense and I didn't jumble it up too much. Sometimes I have a tendency just to kind of ramble on. Dynamic effort, that is going to be lifting a submax load. Okay, a load that is not maximal. If it's maximal, it's going to be easily over 90%. A submax load lifted at maximum velocity or maximum speed. This is where I think a lot of people get confused, and they think that it has to be light weights. It doesn't necessarily have to be light weights. Going off that definition, sub-max load means it's not maximal. Lifted at maximal speed, that maximal speed doesn't mean that it's going to be the same speed. It's all going to be the same speed. So if you're lifting it at 80%, it's going to be slower than if you're lifting at 50%, but you're still giving your highest degree of effort. Your intent to move the bar as fast as possible is still there. Okay? That's what makes it dynamic effort. So in reality, and if you're doing multiple reps, now it could be repeated effort or submax effort, but with dynamic effort, you're not going to get close to failure. Okay? Yes, it's submax, but the main determination of whether it's dynamic effort or not is the intent that you're applying effort to it's that your intent of execution is at the highest possible speed. Okay, so if you're moving the bar as fast as you can, then it becomes dynamic effort. Dynamic effort training, the way Westside utilized that, the way Louie Simmons intended it, was you wanted to be at certain speeds, and this has changed over time, and I really don't know what they're doing now. I know they migrated away from their old 8 sets of 2, 10 sets of 2, 8 sets of 3 on bench, singles on deadlift. They've migrated away from that to doing 5 sets of 5, and I don't know what they're doing now. I don't even know. I'm not 100% sure about how they apply the 5x5. Again, don't think of dynamic effort method being locked into what was popularized by Westside Barbell. That's how they applied it. And I'm not absolutely 100% not criticizing how they applied it. They applied it in a situation that was best for them at that time, and they applied it honestly ingeniously because the results they got out of it were fantastic. I'm just trying to get down to what actually dynamic effort is. So if, dynamic effort, it's not just throwing a light weight on the bar. It's moving the bar at the fastest possible speed. Okay, whatever speed that may be, that's in relation to the intensity that you have. So it could be, you could be lifting 30%, and that would be dynamic effort if you're applying max speed. You could be lifting at 80%, and that would be dynamic effort if you're lifting the bar at maximal speed. Another key is you need to shut that set down when the bar starts to slow down, because as the bar starts to slow down, you're exhibiting slower speeds and fatigue, then you're actually moving into repeated effort, or even just getting out of the dynamic effort, because you're losing the speed that's so important to making that method productive method. And the reason I don't want to get into percentages a whole lot, other than to say it could be any percentage, I don't want to define specific percentages, is because different exercises are going to require different percentages to achieve the results that you desire. So if you're lifting, if I was kind of, I have a huge kind of West Side-ish background in my training and in my thought process. So if I'm looking at Olympic lifts, such as the snatch, the clean and jerk, or just the clean, if you want to separate those out, I'm going to be training and I'm going to apply dynamic effort in the same kind of backgroundish type way as was applied to the squat and the bench and the deadlift coming out of West Side. Then I'm going to increase those percentages, probably get most of my training in the 75 to 85% range. Because 60% and 50% done on those type of movements would be too light to operate with proper, not necessarily with proper technique, but with I don't feel that you could get what you wanted out of a clean at 50% versus what you can get out of a squat at 50%. The other thing that you have to look at there is West Side typically utilized accommodating resistance. So they had bands or chains on the bar. While you can do the Olympic lifts with accommodating resistance, most of the time you're probably not going to, for different reasons, which we don't need to get into in this conversation, because it'll take us too far off topic. But that's another thing that you have to figure into play. So if West Side has 50% bar weight, they may have another 20% or 30% band weight or chain weight that you have to figure in. So now their percentages is different at the bottom and the top. And again, we don't need to get into that right now, because my point that I'm trying to make isn't what percentage you should be using. It is how you should be lifting the weight, and that determines whether it's dynamic effort or not. Another thing I'm going to throw in there in regards to dynamic effort, and this goes to James Smith, who was he wrote for Elite FTS for a long time. Really kind of a brilliant guy, a very misunderstood guy. Really dig down deep into what he was trying to accomplish. And I'm not saying this. I was reading some of my notes over his stuff last night, and some of the stuff I'm like, okay, you got this. I wrote this down in my notes, but you definitely defined this wrong as it was defined previously. And I don't really need to get into all that because that's irrelevant, but really kind of a brilliant guy. And he also classified, when talking about dynamic effort training, that he would classify sprints as dynamic effort, and plyos and box jumps and jump training and things of that nature, med ball throws. Those were all dynamic effort, and they're much, he's doing them body weight. He's doing med ball throws with light med balls. It could even be heavier med balls, provided you can still throw the med ball. Jumps with weight, jumps without weight. Those are all dynamic effort methods because they satisfy the idea of non-maximal load performed at maximal speed. Okay, and again, the maximum speed will be dependent on the intensity that you're training at, but it needs to be an intensity because you're going to lift maximum weights at maximum intent. Um, they're not going to move fast, but they're going to move it at as fast as you can. But when you get to sub max loads, when you get to that 80%, you don't have to lift 80% as fast as you can. You can just do the movement. And the same with any percentages less than that, or body weight. You can just do the movement. Even a jump, you can just do a jump without exhibiting maximal speed. So the key here is you have to perform the movement at your maximal speed. Okay. And that's dynamic effort training. The last one is max effort training, and this is the heaviest of the different methods. Maximal effort is lifting maximal loads. Okay. It doesn't have to necessarily be an absolute, you don't have to fail. Okay. And that's where I think, looking back at it, I kind of went wrong when I did a lot of max effort work. I still do max effort work. I just don't do it all the time. But I took everything to failure every time. And when I was younger, that wasn't an issue. But when I was older, it became more of an issue. I think if you leave a little bit in the tank, it's still maximal. Okay, so it's still max effort. But it's not necessarily you're pushing that maximum limit to failure. Failure is tremendously hard on your nervous system, and it takes a lot more to recover from, and you don't really have to do that to get the results you want. You can leave a little bit left there, but you do need to be pushing the limits. It should be very heavy lifting. And max effort is really simple. I mean, put the most weight as you can on the bar and lift it. And that's really all it is you're trying to lift maximal loads. Now, how are you going to define that load? And this, a lot of people screw this up because they go into max effort and they just think, oh, I have to give maximum effort. Well, yes, but the weight needs to be very heavy. Okay, if you're doing a 5 rep max and calling it maximal effort, it's not max effort. It's repeated effort. If you're doing a 5 rep max, it's the intensity is too low. It's too low to be maximal. Okay, because at a 5 rep max, you're probably not even hitting 90%. You're probably more like 87, 88%. That's not maximum effort. If you're doing, and I've seen this too, we're going to do a 20 rep max today. Okay, so you're doing a repeated effort day. That's not a max effort day. If you want to say you're replacing the max effort work today with a repeated effort and you're going to do a 20 rep max, fine. Why are you doing that? You should have a better reason than, well, I want to mix it up. That's not a good reason. But it's not max effort. And we need to start classifying max effort as the heaviest weight you can lift on a given day. If you look back at how the Bulgarians trained, and I don't know this for a fact, but I would say max effort training came from the Bulgarians. They maxed out every day, and I think they did it twice a day on most days, whether it be squat, whether it be cleans, snatches, whatever, front squat. They were going to take a max. That didn't mean that they were at their absolute best and hitting PRs in every workout. They lifted up to what their best was for that day, and and I wasn't there. I didn't see them applying it, but my understanding of it was that, and this is written about many instances, there's a difference between a training max and a competition max. What the Bulgarians did is they worked up to a training max. They could shut it down based off, that was really heavy and I'm extremely tired and I don't think I can get another one. That may leave, in weightlifting terms, 20 kilos, 10 kilos on the bar from what they're actually capable of. But on that day, they didn't feel they were, so they shut it down. maybe they worked up and their technique started to go too much out the window, so they're having technical failure. Well, that's not good in powerlifting either, but especially in weightlifting where it's such a technical sport and you don't want to reinforce technical faults. You know, you want to reinforce proper techniques. So when you get to those, and no, especially the absolute heaviest, I shouldn't say no, but at some point your technique is going to fail and you need to be able to get through that, but it doesn't mean you need to train it. Okay, it doesn't mean you need to train that way because at your heaviest maximal loads, technique is going to fail at some point. It's going to go out the window. But we want to train ourselves to be able to do it properly as much as possible, all the way up to that maximum, those maximal weights. Um, that's really all I have on max effort lifting. And I mean, I can get into, yeah, let's take a step back. I'll get into just a little bit of what these are accomplishing. Um, so I'm going to flip back to dynamic effort for just a second because I didn't get into this. Why do we do um, like I said in that first video, this is going to be raw and unscripted and unedited, so you're getting me thinking as I'm going through this because I have barely any notes at all. I just kind of wrote down some topics. Then I'm gonna back up even more. Okay, so we're gonna go now. I'm gonna stick with this methods of strength training, submax effort, repeated effort, dynamic effort, and I'm gonna classify or explain why you're gonna do each one. I kind of explained what each one was. Now, why are you gonna do it? I do believe I said this before. Submax effort and repeated effort is gonna be for hypertrophy. The submax effort, you probably won't get as much hypertrophy out of it as you would the repeated effort, but you're still doing it. That's kind of the general reason you're going to do it. The reason you would differentiate is if you don't want to exert if you don't want to place as much stress on your system or your athlete system, you have periods of time where you're not wanting to take that stress level very high, you would do sub max effort. The repeated effort method is going to be used at times when you're wanting to push that stress level higher. Okay. For me personally, I use a block model that I kind of created from a number of different sources. I put it together. When I'm in my accumulation phase or my accumulation block, I'm going to be using more for my assistance work. I'm going to be using more repeated effort method. I'm really going to push that assistance work hard. Whereas when I get to my intensification block, I want more of my adaptation going to the heavier weights. So I'm not going to push the repeated effort method as hard with my assistance work, maybe in some cases, but it'll be more limited. When I get to my sub max effort, or most of my assistance work though, will be done with sub max effort, where I'm just going to get the work in. It might get kind of heavy, but I'm really not going to push those limits as far as getting close to failure because I want my adaptation to be shifted away from that hypertrophy and shifted more to my max strength. Okay, so in order to do that, because I don't want my adaptation to be spread out everywhere, I want it to be concentrated in certain areas. So my by moving from repeated effort to submax effort in that last block, it allows more of my adaptation to go to the heavier weights, my higher intensity lifts, and I will get better results as far as max strength by doing that. Okay, so that's submax, and repeated effort is why as I'm doing it and how and when I would apply it. Dynamic effort training, why am I doing it? To improve two things. One, rate of force development. Two, explosive strength. Those two kind of go hand in hand. They're not exactly the same thing, but they're very highly related. Rate of force development is how fast can I turn it on. Explosive strength is going to The difference between, I guess, explosive strength, without having to look this up and get a definition on it, explosive strength is going to be more of your high power movements where you have to have enough significant load at a high enough velocity that that will, if you figure it out mathematically, would achieve a very high result in power output, where you don't necessarily, I believe, off the top of my head, with some of your lighter high speed movements, which is still training um, rate of force development. You're still having a high rate of force development, but you might not be achieving that high power output because uh, the amount of force that you're actually exerting is not going to be high enough, meaning the load that you're using isn't high enough to get that total power output as high. Um, the speed component would still be high. You would still be exerting enough power or force to very quickly, turning it on very quickly, but because the weight component would be lower, the force component would be lower, your total power output wouldn't be as high. Okay, so, but dynamic effort training, improve rate of force development, improve explosive strength. Um, Critical for athletes. That's why it athletes need to lift explosively. Okay, and plyos, that's dynamic effort. Or in the weight room, dynamic effort for squat, bench, maybe deadlift. Dynamic effort, cleans, snatches, whatever you utilize, whatever you place your priorities, whatever you're comfortable coaching, but they need to have that dynamic effort training because I can't think of too many sports. Then yes, there are some. Obviously, cross country, your long distance runners, marathon runners are not going to exhibit very high amounts of power or explosive strength, but um, for the most part, most of the sports you're going to be working with um, are going to be are going to utilize high power in some way, shape, or form. Uh, they need to be able to be explosive, be fast, be, have those first few steps be very fast, be able to jump, be able to change directions, um, punch, hit, kick, whatever um, whatever movement that they do. We want to be able to train those things very fast and explosively. Um, Max effort work. Why are you going to do that? To develop the absolute maximal amount of force production that you can have, and that's to get as strong as possible. So if you're trying to be good at powerlifting, to be good at weightlifting, to be good at strongman, you have to have max effort training in your program in some fashion. It doesn't have to be in there all the time, but you do need to have periods of training where you really push the envelope on those max effort work. And the more specific you can make it to what you're trying to accomplish, the better. So if you know you're going to be doing, powerlifting and weightlifting is easy because you have squat, bench, dead, and powerlifting, you're going to do it with the same, that's what you want to be pushing. Weightlifting is easy, clean and jerk, snatch, and you can push up your maximum strength in other ways as well through squatting. That'll help you with your cleans and your snatches, front squats. Uh, but you can employ max effort work in your competition events and strongman as well. You just need to know which event and how it's going to be performed. You can still, if it's a more endurance related event, maybe not quite as much, but still pushing that max limit in those movements, whether it be a deadlift, an axle deadlift, a stone lift, an over different. They have different variations of overhead lifts, dumbbell overhead presses. Um, you want to be doing max effort work in those exercises or in those events to develop the max strength that you will need. Max effort's a simple one when it comes to why you do it. It is to get as strong as possible. So, not a lot of explanation needed there. You can get deeper into it as far as max effort work does. Let me see if I can pull this up. I do have some of my notes pulled up on my computer. I'm going to look at them real quick. Um, because I think max effort method, there is some science here that is. So this is basically directly out of Vladimir Zatsiorsky's book. It's my notes. So it's probably not quoting him exactly, but it's what he said. So it's going to be superior at improving intermuscular and intramuscular coordination. Intermuscular coordination is going to be the coordination between, if you're looking at a squat, when is your quads need to be activated? When does your hamstrings need to be activated? Your glutes, are they all firing in the proper order? Are they working together to achieve that squat? Intramuscular coordination are the hamstrings firing correctly at the right time? Because it's the coordination within that muscle. So that one's a little bit harder for me to explain, but basically, are the motor units firing at the right time? Are they firing at the right rate? Within the hamstring, so you're getting maximal exertion out of that hamstring. You going back into all this came really popular around probably '06, maybe '07 through about 2011, 2012, activation exercises. Oh, my glutes aren't firing. Or that athlete's glutes aren't firing, their hamstrings aren't firing. So we need to do exercises to turn those muscles on. That's kind of what intramuscular coordination is. We need to make sure that those muscle groups are turned on and firing appropriately. Max effort method is great at getting those things to happen. Max effort method reduces CNS inhibition. So, oh man, I remember studying this in physiology, and I cannot repeat it, but basically there's a point where your body becomes defensive, and it says this weight is a risk to the body. The Golgi tendon organ, GTO, the Golgi tendon organ, and it shuts down, which you would think, oh, that puts you at greater risk. But what it's doing is saying, and it does put you at greater risk, but it's saying my tendons are going to tear. This weight is too much. My tendons are going to tear. So I'm going to shut the muscle down so my tendons won't tear or my muscles won't tear. So we want to inhibit that. By training maximally, we can actually train the body to inhibit that, which will activate the maximal number of motor units that need to be fired, so that the body will say, oh, I am okay here because I have this many motor units firing. I'm okay. I don't need to shut down, and I can keep lifting. That's in basic layman's terms. That's what's happening. Yeah, so that's basically from a scientific standpoint what the max effort method is doing. And other things that they talk about. The thing of max, there was not too long ago, maybe a month ago. I don't know. Get on Elite FTS's Facebook channel and you can look it up. Dave Tate did a table talk. He did it by himself. Normally he's got another person, 2, 3 other people sometimes, and they're having a discussion. He did one just by himself, and it covered the max effort method. It was a fantastic video. He had tons of information, and I'm not trying to get that in depth here, but I definitely recommend that video. It's probably called something like max effort training or something, but it's on Elite FTS's Table Talk. It's by Dave Tate. He talks by himself over the max effort method. I definitely highly recommend it. Look it up, watch it. It is long, but he goes into great detail about how to perform the max effort method, why to perform it, when to perform it. Basically, everything you need to know about the max effort method. And training geeks like me love that stuff. So I would definitely recommend it for you to learn. Max effort method. Don't avoid, or you want to avoid high emotional stress. This goes back, look what I was saying about competition max and training max. A competition max is going to cause a high level of emotional stress. So you don't want to do that all the time in training, because the emotional stress is just like any type of stress. All stress affects your body. It could be distress, which is bad, or eustress, which is good. EUSTRESS, eustress. So when you see someone you like and you get happy, you haven't seen them in a long time, you get happy, that's eustress. Versus something that happens negatively is distress. And most training is going to cause distress to the body. The body has to recover from it. That does not exclude that's not just the physical stress that we like to talk about and that we think about. It's also the mental and emotional stress. So when you're getting yourself amped up for a lift, it's causing a high degree of emotional stress, which makes it harder to recover. You don't want to do that all the time. So when you're employing the max effort method in your workouts, you should avoid, and I know, your meatheads and your bro, when you go into bro mode, you're wanting to get really amped up to get a lift. Sometimes that's fake, sometimes it's not, but you want to avoid doing that in training. Competition, for me, I like to stay calm because I'm already amped up. In my head, I am amped up and I am on fire. If I let myself exhibit that, if I let that out, I become too amped up for the lift, and I've failed multiple times in competition because of that. So I have to try to bring myself down and stay calm in between attempts in competition. Now, I'm a realist. I realize you're not ever going to avoid getting amped up before a lift in training, but you want to avoid doing it too much or too frequently. If you use it too much, it can cause staleness, which will bring, because of the motivational level, the emotional level that always goes into lifting, lifting very heavy in the max effort method, it'll actually cause a negative effect over time. Doing it too much, it can cause anxiety, depression, more fatigue than what you should have in the mornings, increased perception of effort while lifting. I've been there on all of these things, and increased blood pressure. So that is a reason why you want to keep your emotional level low when training. Keep your emotions at low. Just walk up, lift the bar. You're still going to give maximal effort, and yeah, you're probably going to still get into it, but you want to keep that motivational level low during training. Okay, I'm going to wrap up for today because I've already been talking for over 40 minutes. I'll get to maybe next week or at some point. I'll get into classification of training means. That's the GPP, the SPP, and the SSP. And that's really the ones where I was sitting there last night. I've been thinking about all week, sitting there last night, going through my notes, going through books, and they do require a bigger discussion. So this is a good point to end it. So I'm going to wrap it up. Hope to see you guys next week. Again, this is the Ironwood Strength Show. And if you like the channel, please follow it. Please share it with your friends. Please like the videos. Hope to see you guys again next week.